Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast coming to you after the NFL draft. I've given it a week for things to die down, for the discourse to sort of take its toll, for things to maybe be worked out, for news to come out, and now I'm finally ready to talk about the draft. And well, there's only I say talk about the draft. There's only really one bit of business that we can really talk about when it comes to the draft, but don't worry, you know who I'm going to be talking about, and we will be diving into him in a second. But first, I need to do the admin, which is, oh, as always, just saying thank you very much for listening. Don't forget that if you are new, if you've stumbled upon us, then don't forget to like and subscribe on our various social media platforms. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and we are at MRB Sport Media on Twitter. So feel free to check us out there. And as always, if you are a returning listener, then thank you very much, as always, for making me that little bit of your week and continuing to support us. Right, with that out of the way, it's let's not beat about the bush any longer. Let's get into the main topic that everyone is talking about regarding the NFL draft, and that is, of course, the fall of Shedeur Sanders, the one who many believed was the best. Oh, some believe was the best. Some people believed he should be taken in the first round. The one particular ESPN analyst in particular felt that everyone was making a huge mistake by not taking him in the first round. That, of course, being Mel Kiper. Some, thought he was a backup. Some, he was certainly the most hyped and the most, notorious, shall we say, draft pick. Not even just quarterback, just draft pick total in this draft. So he was always going to be the main story coming out of it. Obviously, he goes to the Cleveland Browns in with pick 144. And the discourse, of course, has been why did he slide? Now, I want to make it sort of I don't think that his on the field play had anything to do with his slide. I honestly don't. I think if you look at the numbers that he put up, the performances, yes, you can make the argument, it was in the Big 12. Is that really the best quality opponent that he could be going up against? It's not like he's doing it in the SEC or the Big 10 or he has gone past the ACC. I think that does need to be put in there. He did well. I think based on play, I certainly think he would be a second round, third round developmental pick, someone to be a backup and then move. I certainly don't think he was ever going to be. I don't think he was ever going to be a first round franchise quarterback. The way that people are talking about Cam Ward, I certainly don't think that. So I don't think his on field play had anything to do with this. I think if you ask most people, his on the field play would have warranted, again, maybe late first round, certainly second or third, not as far as he drove down. This was all about his off the field stuff. Now there have been various reports about how he handled everything, from the combine to pro days and everything along those lines. And I don't think that necessarily had a big deal with that. We've seen players skip the combine and still go relatively high. We've seen players attend the combine and still drop for whatever reason. We've seen players give bad performances during their interviews. You look at Jamarcus Russell, probably the most famous example. The story comes out that the Raiders gave him blank tapes as like a sort of trick in order to get something done. And he comes in the next day and says he watched blitz packages because, and then that was, meant to be a thing of, oh, is he really worth it or is he lazy? And he still ended up going with the number one pick. So again, I don't necessarily think this was down to his bad performances on there. I mean, it may have played a part in it. You've heard the stories of the Brian Daboll story of what the New York Giants said about him. That if that's how he acted with everyone, I'm pretty sure he didn't act that way with everyone. But there would have been time, you would assume there would be times when he did it. Then that probably played a part, but not the big one. I honestly think this whole thing is or not the whole thing, but the vast majority of the blame goes to Deion Sanders. Some of it his fault, some of it not his fault. I I've talked about it in the past, but the way that he talked about Shedeur and saying, there's only a handful of teams that they're going to go to, I don't think that helped. I mean, I've said to an extent I defend that position because I think you should have some level of control over where you're going, but that's not how the rest of the NFL operates. And in that time, you have to sort of bow to their wishes, as it were. So you don't come out and publicly say that. And whilst he did tone it down, I think that would have put some teams off. I also think that the prospect of Deion Sanders' name being mentioned in any head coaching circles, if that head coach were to be fired, I'll give the example. If the Pittsburgh Steelers don't do well this year and they drafted Sheduer Sanders, Mike Tomlin may be on the hot seat after the past couple of years he's given. Do they then want to have the name Deion Sanders potentially floating around as a head coaching candidate and the media circus that would produce? Because again, Shedeur has only been coached by Deion, to Jackson State and to high school. He's only had the one head coach, and you see what the media circus is around Deion Sanders. Do NFL teams, really want that? Do they want to say, okay, if this happens in 12 months' time, do we want to have Deion Sanders constantly, causing us problems? I think that would have been a part of it as well. So Shedeur going or dropping as far as he did, I think again, everything to do with his off the field. I don't think it had anything to do with his on the field play. I also don't think there was any collusion involved in this. And that's one of the things that has been sort of brought up, especially on draft night. People talking about now, the direct comparison that people made when it came to collusion was with Colin Kaepernick. And I didn't agree that there was collusion in this way where, all 32 teams said, we're not going to take him. We don't want the headache. I didn't think that at the time. I'm not totally dismissing it, but I just didn't agree. I also didn't think there was collusion at this point because for a collusion to take part like that, you would have needed all 32 teams taking part. And the fact of the matter is, for someone who's being hyped as a potential, instant starting quarterback, potentially, how many teams actually needed a starting quarterback? Three, maybe four. You can make the argument. The Steelers certainly were in the discussion. The Titans were obviously in the discussion, but they took Cam Ward, so you can really take them out. The Minnesota Vikings, there's been some talk there, whether or not JJ McCarthy's going to be ready, because this is going to effectively be his rookie year. That's why you've seen the links with Aaron Rodgers, all that sort of stuff. The Cleveland Browns are in that discussion as well. Beyond that, you can make maybe a stretch for someone like the Arizona Cardinals and Kyler Murray. If that doesn't really work out, maybe the Miami Dolphins with Tua Tagovailoa. Maybe you can stretch to the Jets and if Justin Fields, you can make stretches. But really, what is it? 3/4 of the league we're not in the position to draft him. So I don't think we can. We're not saying not in a position to draft him, but we're not going to be taking him. Much in the same way that I never really bought the argument that 32 teams passed on Russell Wilson when he fell to the third round in 2012, I believe it was. The Patriots didn't draft him; they already had Tom Brady. The Colts didn't draft him; they already had Andrew Luck. The Broncos, because they're Peyton Manning, so on and so forth. So it wasn't 32 teams. So collusion certainly not a part of it. But when you narrow it down to all those teams that needed it again, do you really want the headache of dealing with the Sanders as your, in the immediate future and in the medium term future as well? I don't think you do. I don't think any team does, and that's why he slid down. Eventually, the Browns probably said, right, it's gonna have to be someone. We're not mortgaging the house, and we're not going to lose our franchise if Shedeur Sanders doesn't work out. If he has been too overly hyped, then yeah, we're not gonna lose the house on pick 144. So let's take a chance. He'll go in, he'll compete. Maybe they've got the steal of the draft, like the Patriots did with Tom Brady all these years ago. Maybe he's just a fifth round pick, and he sits as a backup behind Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco or whatever for a year, and then develops and maybe becomes a reasonable backup quarterback at some day. So I think that's it. I think those are the main reasons why Shedeur Sanders did. Again, certainly nothing to do with his play. His play warranted him being put much further up. But with all the reports and all the claims and all the stories that came out regarding what was happening off the field, I don't I don't think you can really blame the NFL or the 32 teams or the 5 teams, like I said, for not drafting him for that amount of headache. No, what have I said about the Steelers with Aaron Rodgers? I don't want the media circus. I don't want the headache. There are probably plenty of teams that said, No, we don't want the headache. So I just don't. I just don't think you can really blame the NFL or blame the teams for this. It may be a bad look for the whole NFL. If he does go on to become Tom Brady, then there will be 31 teams that start kicking themselves to think why didn't we draft him as our backup? The Patriots were probably thinking that, well, because it was Drew Bledsoe that got injured. Yeah, a pretty decent insurance policy eventually came out of it. So maybe they will kick themselves. But I think more likelihood of it is he's going to be a reasonable quarterback. I don't think he's going to be the star that everyone makes him out to be. And that's why he dropped as far as he did. I will just end the Shedeur Sanders stories on one thing, and that's the prank calls that have been coming at around this. Do I think it was right for, Jeff Ulbricht's son, the DC of the Atlanta Falcons, or was it right for his son to do that? No, I don't think so. At the same time, I think the way this has been the overreaction to this has been a little bit weird to me. Because let's be honest, if you were in that situation, if you were a teenager and you had that number of a potential, first round quarterback, would you not at least be tempted? Go back to yourself at 18 years old. Would you not be at least the slightest bit tempted to do something crazy about it? I think it's reasonable to say that a lot of people would have. So again, I'm not saying he's totally blameless. He shouldn't have done it, but I think the reaction to all this, the big fines that have been handed out, you know, maybe that's a sort of a tentative punishment to dissuade people from doing it in the future. £250,000. Make sure it doesn't happen again, because whoever's guilty of it next time will we'll be getting a $500,000 fine, because there's certain data privacy information sort of surrounding it. But on the whole, I think the overreaction to this has been pretty egregious. Some people talking about maybe them losing draft picks. No, it was. I'm not going to say a harmless prank, but it was just a prank, and I don't think it really needed to warrant all the attention it did, especially when there were other players who also got prank called as a result of this. Again, if it was only Shedeur, then maybe there'd be a story to it. But the fact that happened to more players, it's a thing that happened. It probably won't happen again. It's probably happened years in the past, but because of Shedeur, it's just made news stories. So I just think the overreaction to this is a bit too much. I mean, again, hopefully it doesn't happen again. But if it does, let's just calm it down just a little bit. Right, and moving on to our second topic, and this one sort of surrounds the draft, and it's an idea that it's not an idea I've had, because I've definitely copied this from something in the past, but it's an idea that I think the NFL might it might benefit the NFL to introduce, and that's I say reintroduce because they never did it, but for them to introduce the idea of territorial picks. Now, this is something that the NBA and the ABA did back in the day when they were trying to grow the sport, of basketball. And the idea behind territorial picks is if you live within if your team is based within a certain radius of a college team, then you can surrender your first round pick and make a player from one of your local colleges, make them a first round pick, and get this budding talent. Because again, this was during the days where they wanted star attractions, star players. So if a star player went to, for the sake of argument, the University of Minnesota, and the back in the day, as it was, the Minneapolis Lakers wanted to draw attention and get a big name because they've already got the name brand in the city, or in the state, then let's draft that player and he'll be with the Minneapolis Lakers. Right, so there've been a couple of territorial picks, and again, it was a way of growing the thing. Now, obviously, the NFL doesn't need to grow the sport, but I think that might be a really good idea for the NFL to bring in. Again, now picture this: the Denver Broncos. Just because we're going off this most recent draft, the Denver Broncos, if they have their number one draft pick, which they did this year, obviously, they, instead of picking like in the teens where they did, they could surrender their first round pick and go get Travis Hunter. That way, you know that you are going to be getting a star player, from locally, because you've got a lot of knowledge of him because he only plays down the road, and you go get Travis Hunter. You can play this out across the whole of the NFL if you want. Go back to previous years. Nick Bosa, for instance, from Ohio State, would have, more than likely, the Cleveland Browns use their number one pick. They go get Nick Bosa. The Bengals, because they're instead of Ohio, they get his brother Joey. The Pittsburgh Steelers go get Aaron Donald. Um, let's just see if I can pick any more, from the couple. The Dallas Cowboys or the Houston Texans could get Patrick Mahomes because he played at Texas Tech. And the examples keep going. I just think that would be a really good way, especially if the NFL is going to continue, with the NIL deal. Sort of the rules around college football have changed so much in the past few years. Why not just go the whole hog and basically, if players are going to be paid for what they're going to do, then maybe they should be paid and allowed to pick where they're going to go with an idea of where they're going to go in the pros. Let a player go to, I'll just pick Villanova, I think it is, in Philadelphia. Let the Villanova, football team go on a huge rampage because they get all the players because everyone wants to play for the Eagles. Screw it, let's do it. I just think that would be a really, really cool idea for the NFL to introduce. Now, there are a couple of logistical issues to it, so it's not a perfect idea. So, for instance, the Buffalo Bills. Who do the Buffalo Bills get? Because there's not really a decent, a top tier, as it were, college football program in upstate New York. There's Syracuse, but how many star players have come out of Syracuse in the past 20 years or so? Not that many. Okay. Let's see. The Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas Jayhawks are predominantly, it's a basketball college, so they may not get the best. So as I said, there are some flaws to it. Who gets the ownership of Ohio State for the Cleveland Browns and Cincinnati Bengals? Who gets the ownership of Penn State for the Steelers and the Eagles, for instance? Again, there are a few flaws. Again, maybe you just say, right, you just got to gamble on it. Let the Steelers and the Eagles take a gamble on Abdul Carter, for this year. If you really want an edge rusher, you've got to basically be the first ones to put your name in the hat. Get similar to waiver wise. You've got to be the first ones to claim. You just got luck of the draw. I just think that would be a really, really good way to help merge even further the relationship between college football and the NFL. I don't know. What do you guys think? Again, there was probably a reason. The NBA and the ABA took it away after a while. Maybe again because they probably grew their brand, they probably didn't need it. But I just think it would be a really good idea. And I will point out there are a couple of caveats as well because I'm talking about like dividing up, Pennsylvania between the Eagles and the Steelers, for instance. You, if you want, you can even go back to high school with it because that's what the Philadelphia 76ers did with Wilt Chamberlain. Because he went to school at Kansas, but he grew up in Philadelphia, went to high school in Philadelphia. So they were able to claim his rights that way. So I'm trying to think the best example I can think of is Ezekiel Elliott. Went to Ohio State, but I believe he was born in Missouri. So technically he would be within the Kansas City Chiefs' market for it. So if the Chiefs want to see if they can go get him, rather than leaving it up to the Bengals and the Browns in Ohio, if they want to jump the gun, say, hey, he went to high school in Missouri, go get him. So I just think it'd be a really, really good way to sort of add a little bit more spice to the draft as well. And again, it means that not necessarily the best player goes to the worst team. Let's let's shake things up a bit. If you are the Jacksonville Jaguars and you're going to be picking fifth, say, but you really want the guy who's in first, you may be lucky that you have the rights to him because he went to Florida or Florida State. All that sort of stuff. So those middle of the road teams can get the better players. I think it just opens up a whole bunch of avenues to it. So I think it's something that the NFL really, really should be looking into exploring. Right, moving away from the draft ever so slightly, and I do want to talk about one thing that did catch my eye over the course of the past couple of days, and that's Abdul Carter, the now edge rusher for the now New York Giants, no, now New York Giants, now edge rusher for the New York Giants, coming out of Penn State, and his desire to wear the number 56 jersey. Now, the number 56 jersey, for those of you who may not know, I'm assuming you do know, but just in case you don't, was worn by Lawrence Taylor, the man who many believe is the greatest defensive player to ever play the game. If you ever watch The Blind Side, he's the guy at the start that they talk about effectively changing the left tackle position because of the way he played. He is the man that set the mold for what edge rushers and outside linebackers are today. He's the reason that I'm not saying he's the reason why they had a career, but he's the reason why people like TJ Watt and Miles Garrett and the Bosas and Khalil Mack and Von Miller and a whole bunch of other players. I'm sure, I got James Harrison. I'm just rattling players off here. That they are the reason. He is the reason why they are so highly touted because he changed the position into what it is today. Again, greatest defensive player, some would argue, of all time. The fact that Bill Belichick, has basically taken umbrage over that discussion over the past couple of years as well, basically slamming down any suggestion that he isn't, sort of tells you where he sort of ranks. But Abdul Carter wanted to go and wear his number 56 when he moved to the New York Giants. And Lawrence Taylor, I think quite rightly, shot it down. Now, to an extent, I somewhat respect Abdul Carter for at least having the confidence, the courage, or whatever it is, to try and want to live up to a name like Lawrence Taylor. I somewhat admire it. I think it's a little bit too much. I think it's maybe a little bit too cocky and arrogant, but I admire it to an extent. However, I do think that it was very much the wrong decision for him to request to wear the number. If anything, it should have been a situation like what the Tennessee Titans did with Warren Moon. Because Warren Moon gave his number one jersey, the number one jersey that he wore, retired by the Tennessee Titans. He came out in a press conference and gave it, bequeathed it, for lack of a better term, although I think that's the perfect one, bequeathed it to Cam Ward and basically gave him permission to wear it, even though the Tennessee Titans have retired the number. I think that would have been good. If Lawrence Taylor was kind enough to say, "Hey, I think you can live up to this number. Feel free to take it." I think that would have been okay. But for Abdul Carter to assume that he's gonna want to, or he, would have been given Lawrence Taylor's number, I think just a little bit too far on that end. So now it does raise the discussion whether or not it could pave the way for other things. Now, the reason he wore number 11 and I know it's different. I know it's different in college because they don't really retire that many numbers because of the roster size, never, or whatever. So there are some numbers that are passed down through players and made special. Like number 11 is a special number at Penn State. It was now formerly worn by Micah Parsons. I know Notre Dame, if you are a defensive player, the number 5 holds a lot of special significance. That's what Manti Te'o wore. I know there are others, but for the life of me, I'm blanking on them right now. But I know there are some numbers that if you are special, you carry down that lineage. Whereas in the professional level, once you get a great player, then that's it. That's done. Nobody's wearing 12 for the Patriots ever again. I think we can all sort of agree. We can all definitely agree with that. No one is going to be wearing, I just want to pick one more example. I don't think anyone's going to be wearing 15 for the Chiefs. I don't think anyone's going to be wearing 87 for the Chiefs. I don't think anyone's going to be wearing 17 for the Bills, so on and so forth. Maybe something like this, I doubt it would be the big one that tips the scale, but something like this may be big enough when maybe NFL teams do decide that this number is going to be a special number. And that, especially now that the NFL numbers have sort of changed dramatically since I was growing up, and now there's a little bit more of a free for all for it on both sides of the ball. So maybe it is going to be a thing where certain numbers are going to be passed down by great players. You know, maybe the Cleveland Browns, if you're the best defensive lineman for the Cleveland Browns, is going to start wearing 95 because of what Miles Garrett has done to change the game on that end. Maybe I can give you an example. Some teams already do it. You look at what the Dallas Cowboys do because they have number 88 that was worn by Michael Irvin. Then it was passed down to it went through a couple of players, but then Des Bryant wore it, their number one wide receiver back in the day, and now it's owned by CD Lamb. So it can be done. Ezekiel Elliott again, he wore number 21. That was previously Deion Sanders' number. So it can be done in the NFL. I just wonder whether or not this is again whether or not a discussion like this is going to cause more teams to do it. I think again, either way you do it, I don't think that's necessarily a right or a wrong way. If you want to have the number retired, go for it. But if you want to have the number be passed down to the greats or the people who are perceived to be great, go for it. There is also then that risk of if you did give, for the sake of argument, Drake May Tom Brady's number 12, what if he doesn't live up to it? Then have you spoiled the number? It is a risk. That's why I prefer retiring numbers. But if you want to do it, then there is an avenue for you to do that. I just hope it comes out and hope it plays out well for you. So interesting discussion. I'd like to see where this goes in the future. Before I go, before we move on to the final topic, it is something I've been weighing up whether or not I do want to do because I've, ironically, my mind did change. I listened to one of the sports talk shows this morning. Basically, wanted to give draft grades this early before the players have played a snap. I do think it is a risky, it is risky and somewhat pointless because we don't know what these players are going to do. There's every single chance the Cam Ward is going to be a complete bust. There's every chance the Shedeur Sanders is going to be great. We can't judge and assume that the players are going to be great based on their position. So it is a bit weird. However, I do want to give what at least on paper is what I think is the best and the worst moves by the NFL teams. So I think the best move was the Cleveland Browns. I think their move in trading down with the Jacksonville Jaguars and getting an additional first round pick next year, which is perceived to be a very, very good draft class, especially for quarterbacks, I think is very, very smart on their end. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the Browns, as my Steeler fan will attest, but I think that one move was pretty smart. So kudos to them for that, and for tricking the Jaguars into giving that up. The worst bit of business I think would be the Atlanta Falcons because I look at what they did towards the end of the draft. Now I really did the end of the first round of the draft, I should say. Now I really did like the first pick that they made. When they took Jalen Walker, the linebacker out of Georgia, I really liked that move. I thought that was a perfect move for them to make. Local kid fits the system, fits what they want to do. Perfect, loved it. But when they came back and gave up all the picks that they needed for for James Pierce Jr., the defensive end out of Tennessee, I thought the Atlanta Falcons gave up slightly too much for him, especially giving up a first round pick next year. Again, when next year is meant to be the better class, I think giving up a first round pick, I think is a slight bit of a gamble. If they'd have given up, an extra 2 or an extra 3 or something, that would have been fine. But the first rounder next year, I'm not really a fan of. So I think that was the quote unquote worst bit of business. Again, it's a bit early to be giving definitive picks and definitive answers right now. But if I had to pick one, it would be that. If I'm being brutally honest. And with that, we move on to our final segment as we have gone on longer than probably I anticipated. Um, and the fun story away from the world of the NFL comes from the UK, comes from England, comes from Liverpool, comes from the world of soccer. And so Liverpool, the football team, soccer team, clinched the English League title this year, clinched the Premier League. Kudos to them. That's not the story. The story is that an Everton fan who Everton and Liverpool are the rival teams. They local derby, share the Merseyside derby. An Everton fan disguised a bunch of flares, smoke bombs, if you want to, for lack of a better term. Disguised a bunch of blue smoke bombs, flares, which is the colour that Everton played in, redressed them, repackaged them as red flares, and then sold them to Liverpool fans. And then you can see in amongst the title celebrations and before the game when it was sort of assumed that Liverpool would win the league, you could see a bunch of blue smoke in amongst all the red. Now, I think it was a little bit weird because Everton are so far behind Liverpool. It's a bit, very much punching up to the bigger brother. If that's all you can do, really, they're about to win the league. You're really not doing anything, but you think you're going to get one over on them for putting in the blue flare. Didn't really make sense to me, but I do think it was a little bit of fun. There would have been some Liverpool fan They had the smoke bomb, ripped it open, set it off, and it came out blue. It's just a little funny. Again, not really my cup of tea, but I think we can all appreciate the pettiness of that moment and that example. So kudos to them, but better luck. Let's see if we can win something on the pitch first, and then you can afford to do a little bit more. But that is the end of this show. I want to thank you very much, as always, for listening. Just like I did at the start of the show, and one more time, just as I always say, thank you very much for listening and putting up with me. If you are new, then don't forget to like and subscribe, especially if you did like this episode. Like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform it is you are listening to. And don't forget, you can subscribe to us on our social medias. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And then on Twitter, we are at MRB Sports Media. So keep an eye out for them as well. And as always, if you are a returning listener, thank you very much for listening in. We will be back in 2 weeks' time when there will hopefully be a little bit more news, maybe some signings, maybe some drama around the signings, maybe some more news about why Sheduer Sanders dropped, and we can talk about that. But we'll have to wait and see on that front. But until next time that I speak to you, take care, and as always, stay safe.